Hello, everyone, and welcome. Give a little wave there if your camera's on. I'm Mark Cochrane, the Regional Director in Asia for UFI, and welcome to another UFI Connects. We are going to, I'll just share my screen here. So today we've got a great session. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We've got Chris Kilbee, who is the Executive Director for ASEAN at Informa Markets. And we're going to do a little rundown around the region to see where we stand in the various markets. I am going to start, though, with a preview of the Asia Pacific Conference. So I'm going to take a few minutes. We're really pleased with the program we've been able to put together. And obviously this year, it's more important than ever that we all gather when we can. So I'll just take a few minutes now to run through the sessions. It's going to be on May 20th. All digital, obviously. Last year, we were unable to be in Macau. Same story this year, but we're still going to be able to get together digitally. So the sessions we're going to kick off, we've got Margaret Ma Conley, who is CEO and President for Informa Markets in Asia. We asked Margaret what she wanted to talk about, and she said she wanted to focus on multi-channel events and the future of multi-channel events in Asia. I think in the past year, Informa Markets has run more than 500 digital events, and they have the biggest commercial, they are the biggest commercial organizer worldwide. So obviously Margaret's going to have a lot to share, not only about lessons learned in the past year, but also the way she sees Informa's portfolio evolving post-pandemic. Next up, we've got Jor Zhou. Jor is CEO at GL Events in China. He's been in that position actually just a little over 2 years, I think about 2.5 years, but he's already put together some really interesting deals. Most recently, Nexus Point has invested about 90 million US in GL Events China, and they're going to put that to work on some M&A deals. Jor also pulled off a rare feat in China, which is he managed to acquire some government-owned shows from CIEC Union. So we're going to have Jor talk a little bit about those deals and about how he sees the landscape in China evolving in the rest of the year and beyond. Prakash from Cologne is coming on. We're going to step outside our industry a little bit here, and he's going to be looking at esports and gaming. I think this is really quite relevant because there's a lot of parallels to live events. With esports and gaming, you've got obviously the digital component, but there's also a live physical event that runs alongside that. It's increasingly a spectator sport. So Prakash is going to talk a little bit about how esports are developing in Asia. There's estimated 3.65 billion gamers worldwide. Korea and China are at the forefront of that, and I think he's going to give us some case studies along those lines as well. Kenny Yong. Kenny is an enthusiastic and energetic entrepreneur. He's the founder of Fireworks Trade Media. In the past year, he's managed to organize more than 5 events in ASEAN. I think 5 events in Thailand alone. So again, this is going to be a bit of a case study where Kenny's going to talk about how they had to evolve and change their strategy on the fly to make those events happen. And he's also going to give it a little bit of an outlook for his business in ASEAN going forward. The first time we've done something like this, we've got Art Basel live. So Art Basel is going on at the same time as our conference. And Andrew Strachan, the GM here in Hong Kong, has agreed to do a really unique session. They're going to give us a live tour of the event as it's happening, and also an overview of the digital component as well. Andrew had to do a fully digital event last year, and this year there's going to be a physical event. So he's going to talk a little bit about how it evolved in 2020 and what they've been able to put together for this year. Honghao Chen is an entrepreneur in China. He has a multi-platform business that is live events and also online platform focused on food and food ingredients. He's based in Wuhan, so he's had quite a year, and he's going to talk about how his business has come out of the pandemic and how online supported him throughout 2020. Tom Mosian is an analyst with Forrester in Singapore. He has just published a long form report on the future of travel. So he's going to be looking at, in his session, vaccine passports, travel restrictions, the outlook for business travel in Asia, what we can expect in the second half of 2020 and 2022. Of course, for all of us, business travel, for most markets in Asia, we can't do without free and restriction-free travel. So I think we'll all get something out of Tom's session. Wendy Lai from Global Sources is going to be talking about building digital communities. Actually, my first job in Hong Kong in the 90s was with Global Sources. They were really early to go online. Originally a trade publisher, Global Sources launched their website in 94, 95. So they've got 25 years of building a digital community. They went into events in 2003. Wendy's going to be talking about their experience over the past couple decades in building digital communities. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a panel session. For those of you who have been to the Asia conference before, you'll be familiar with Siu Hun Yo. She's the founder of Web in Travel, and she's got a great set of panelists from Accor, from Amex, from Novataris, and they're going to be looking at corporate travel and meetings and what the outlook is for that segment going forward. Okay, so registration fee is US 120 for members. For non-members, it's 180. That gives you access to the platform, all the matchmaking, the networking, the exchange sessions, one-on-one chat, as well as obviously the content that I just went through. So I'd encourage all of you to please register. You register at ufiasia.org. Simple process, and you can pay by credit card or bank transfer. All right, so now we're going to go on to our discussion with Chris Kilbee. So Chris, as I mentioned, he's Executive Director for Informa Markets in ASEAN. Chris, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and say hi? There he is.
Hi, everyone. Hi, nice to see you all.
So Chris is coming live from quarantine somewhere in the heart of Bangkok. Is that right, Chris?
I'm in a quarantine hotel in Bangkok. I apologize for my backdrop. It looks like I'm in some sort of old school photo booth, but I'm not. I promise you I'm in a hotel quarantine in Bangkok. But it's nice to speak to you all the same.
All right, so everyone, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through, Chris, a rundown of the key countries in ASEAN. We're going to talk about the state of the market there, how Chris sees it playing out. You can use the chat to put up questions at any point, and I'll call on you to ask the questions if appropriate, if time. All right, so Chris, let's start with Singapore. And maybe you can give us an update there. There's obviously lots of news about a bubble with Hong Kong and potentially with other markets. What's the status of travel in Singapore right now?
Yeah, okay, Mark, thanks. So, firstly, obviously Singapore's a market that I know a bit about. I think there's a few people on the call from Singapore as well, which I know well and discuss this with regularly. So yeah, and obviously throughout this chat, I'll just give, what's obviously my perspective as opposed to, my perspective from Informa Markets in ASEAN as opposed to anything Informa or Informa Markets more broadly. If you think about Singapore in general, I think, Singapore had a tough time last summer. I think travel sort of locked down around last March. I think it was mid-March, as the cases were becoming more difficult, and then Singapore implemented a circuit breaker for I think a couple of months, which was very, very effective, and it took some time to get the cases down, but then effectively since the end of that period they've been very, very low. So kind of I think progressively over recent months life in Singapore has become pretty normal. You know, very, very busy, other than mandatory masks everywhere and small group sizes. But obviously the borders do remain very restricted. So it's gradually becoming easier in terms of border restrictions. And I think that will continue to be the case. But obviously it's far from being normal. And Mark, as you mentioned, the Hong Kong travel bubble, which is coming into play, I think towards the end of May, is hopefully a step in the right direction.
And what about events in Singapore? Maybe you can give us a little flavor of, are events allowed to go ahead? What kind of restrictions are in place?
Yeah, I mean, the events are increasingly allowed to go ahead, but they're on a sort of relatively small scale at the moment. And I think the approach in Singapore is really to gradually open up the event industry. I don't see this going from sort of small events suddenly to large events overnight. I think Singapore's positioning is really around a kind of safe, trusted and innovative event destination. And they're trying to sort of deliver safe, calibrated events along that format. So there's been a couple of different kind of tracks. And I think the one that's very in the public eye is the one where about attendee numbers, which went from 50 last August, then to 250 in October, and has recently moved to 750, which obviously is a step in the right direction. But as we all know, for trade shows, that's not big enough. So there's a kind of parallel work stream or a pilot program, which is moving trade shows onto a larger level above those other events. So this started with an event, Travel Revive, at the back end of last year, which was roughly 1,000 people. There's been recently been a Geo Connect show. There's a construction event being piloted in June. There's a ATX SG, one of Informa's events in July, which should go up to 3,000 people. And we hopefully would then see a gradual increase through the pilot program as we go through the year. So in conjunction with the fairly strict numbers, there's also pretty strict safety management measures in place, things like rapid antigen testing, cohorting groups, etc. And again, these are all in place and designed to present the most safest experience possible and to gradually reopen the industry.
So cohorting groups means essentially the delegates can't move freely around the event, right?
Yeah, and this is, yeah, exactly. And you know, I guess as an industry, we all really understand the cautious approach, and we're very aligned with that in the longer term because it's going to lead to the health of the industry. But obviously, for the organisers, it does cause challenges. The cohorting, particularly the lower numbers, etc. And you know, I think some of the shows that have run, there's an awful lot of work that's having to go into aligning with those safety management measures. But at the same time, we all understand that this is aimed in the right direction and it's there for the right reason. But yeah, cohorting is one of the examples of the safety management in place.
And those events that you mentioned, were they B2B trade shows or were they conferences?
No, so those events that fall into the sort of published numbers of the 50, the 250, the 750, they were a range of conferences, etc. But those shows that I've mentioned, Travel Revive, the construction event, ATXSG, etc., they are much more like trade show events, albeit in the kind of hybrid format that I think Singapore is very, very keen on trialing. And also, you know, with the safety management measures in place, the volume of the event, the style and format of the event looks quite different as well.
Okay, and what about government support for the industry during the pandemic? I mean, STB is pretty well known for being supportive of the industry. Have they come out with financial measures or otherwise to support events?
Yeah, they have. I mean, obviously, like the dialogue between the industry and STB is pretty constant, I've got to say. I mean, you know, this is something that we're all working on together. It's obviously challenging, as it is in every market, and STB's support for the industry has been very strong through things like the Job Support Scheme, the Business Improvement Fund, which was really one of the initiatives designed to help the move towards hybrid. And also, you know, STB are doing a lot in terms of really trying to move the needle forward. There's breathalyzer testing, there's we're trying to get this approach right around testing over quarantine for selected groups. So there's an awful lot going on, and inevitably the dialogue between the organisers and the other stakeholders and STB is pretty frequent in order to try and get the right balance, but to move things forward as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I'm really keen to try getting there, try the Singapore bubble. I had a flight booked last November with the first bubble, and then that was canceled at the last minute.
Yeah.
I think they canceled it on the Sunday, and I was flying on the Tuesday or something like that.
Yeah,
so
I think a number of people were very close. It was very last minute. Yeah.
And I'll try the same again at the end of May when they open the bubble. I think you have to do 4 tests, 2 before I leave Hong Kong, and then 2 on arrival in Singapore as well.
Yeah.
So a couple questions coming up. Joanne Kellaway, can we unmute Joanne and let her ask her question?
Hi, Chris. How you going? Sounds great.
Hi, Joanne. How are you?
Good. Good to see some shows starting to happen. That's what we like. I'm just wondering, do you have to have special rapid testing before people go into the event itself? And if you do, is that being funded by government, or is that up to you?
Yeah, I mean, Joanne, I think it's difficult to say sort of yes or no, because it kind of depends on the show size, etc., and the format, and I think also where the visitors are from, etc., etc. But yeah, certainly for some of the shows, I mean, for instance, for the Travel Revive show that happened last November, there was a kind of rapid antigen testing before you went in, and you had to kind of wait for 15, 20 minutes or so in terms of getting the results back. And that system is gradually evolving as we go through. And yes, that's one of the areas that the STB has been supportive of, in terms of not just the testing, but just some of the safety management measures, etc., that have been put in place in order to allow the shows to go on.
And next, we've got Ian has a question. Can we unmute Ian?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Hi, Chris. Yeah, just wondering what the next steps are. I mean, when are the numbers likely to increase for events? And I mean, is there a timeline in place?
It's a very, very good question, Ian. And I think clearly I'm not the decision maker on that, so I can only give my sort of opinion and from what I'm hearing. But as I mentioned earlier, the rollout now of the next events is quite clear, in terms of the construction event in June, then the tech event in July, which should be around sort of 3,000 people, 3,000 attendees. Obviously, at that point, you've then got World Economic Forum also then taking place in Singapore in August. And that will obviously then be a different dynamic to manage. And we hope that with the successful completion of all of these events, that the numbers should then increase into September and Q4. But I think as part of this kind of gradual calibrated approach, there isn't a specific roadmap that says, right, 5,000 by a certain date and on. It will gradually move as the shows trade.
So next we'll go to Ilaria. She wants to tell us about her experience traveling to Italy.
Yes, I had, hello, hi. I had the 2 experiences.
Italy, sorry, Singapore.
Yeah, I had the two. I was one of the few international attending Travel Revive in November, and I had to take, I think, 5 or 6 swaps. The first one in Italy was on my charge 48 hours before. Then when I arrived in Singapore, STB organized another swap, and they pay for it at the airport at Changi. And then they gave me a token, and they transfer directly to the hotel, Marina Bay Sands, and I stayed to the hotel for 1 night. I received the result the day after around 9 a.m. and I was free to go. Then I went to the Marina Bay Sands, the Congress, and every day I had this kind of a rapid test, around 10 minutes. And there was on STB and or on the organizer side, so I didn't pay anything. And before going back to Italy, I did another swap already on the organizer side, and then I could leave after 5 days. When I came here 4 or 5 weeks ago, but this was for my own purpose. I had my swab before, and I had also a swab at the airport, and I stayed 2 weeks in quarantine on my expenses, $2,000, but STB put me in a nice hotel, and so I could have also the chance to switch for the, let's say, meals. And then after 2 weeks, I had to do another swab, and then I was free to stay in Singapore. And now I'm still in Singapore.
Ilaria, when you said during Travel Revive, you had to do a test each day before the event, you did it on site at the event?
Exactly. I did on the second floor of Marina Bay Sands. I was attending in the ballroom. After 10 minutes, I received an SMS. I showed to the lady, and I could be able to move up to the other floor every day.
Sounds very Singaporean, very efficient. All right. Why don't we move on from Singapore and we'll go on to Malaysia. So Chris, maybe Malaysia's had a few setbacks, had some early success. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the events you've been able to, if you've been able to organize events there, sort of how it's unfolded in the past year.
So Malaysia has been a bit more, I guess, up and down over the last year or so. So that in Malaysia, you have the varying degrees of the sort of movement control order. So I think last March to May, most of Malaysia was in a sort of MCO period. I think that then became a conditional MCO for a period of time. Things got much better, and that allowed some trading of events towards sort of Q3 last year. Then I think at the start of this year, went back into MCO for a while. And then at the current status in KL now is back up to conditional MCO, which effectively then means that shows can take place. And there is some interstate travel, I think, allowed for business travelers. But I think the final stage, I believe, is recovery MCO, which then means full interstate travel. So that the travel is still restricted. In general, kind of Malaysia is in the cases are still relatively high, but the situation for events at the moment is looking pretty good. So there was a show which I think opened today, Home Deck. Obviously, I've not seen it firsthand, but I've seen some pictures from people that were there, which looks pretty strong. It's a few halls, I think, pretty strong SOPs in place. So Malaysia, still has some challenges for sure. And I think that the weeks ahead are really key there. But we're as a business are confident that we will be able to run shows in late Q3 and certainly Q4. We've got a lot of digital activity going on in Malaysia. The team have done a great job there of really pushing forward into digital channels in order to replace the events when they've not been running. But we're confident that in Malaysia, as I say, late Q3, mid to late Q3, Q4 should, if we stay on the same trajectory, look pretty good for live events. I mean, the team.
I guess you're not expecting international participants in those, right? That those would largely.
No, we're not. No, I mean, that obviously with anywhere at the moment, our expectation really is that any international travel is going to be limited, and is going to be limited to potential travel bubbles, etc. But we're really basing the decisions and the strategy on domestic shows. And obviously in Malaysia, a number of our shows are slightly more domestic heavy. We believe that we've got a decent chance in Malaysia later in the year.
And in the past year, you have organized events in Malaysia, right? There was a beauty event that you were able to pull off.
Yeah, we have. I mean, we organized a beauty bonanza live, which was very small, but it was a great achievement because it was completely unplanned and it was unbudgeted, and it was just something that the team pulled together because they saw an opportunity to do so. So as you know, Mark, I think everyone's had to become more innovative and it's an entrepreneurial industry anyway, but even more so in the last year. And the team sort of pulled together this beauty bonanza live concept very, very late in the day. They saw an opportunity where there were suppliers in the beauty industry that had probably excess industry. There were people that wanted to procure. So we organized a sort of slight B2B, B2C combo which was, as I say, it was a small event, but it was very well timed, and it helped our Malaysia business at that time.
And so that was completely unplanned. Roughly what size was it? I think one of the attendees is asking about number of.
Yeah, I think from memory, we're talking under 100 booths. So we're talking pretty small. I can't remember the exact number, but somewhere around that sort of level.
And then visitors, were there any limitations on the number of visitors that you could allow into that event?
I don't think at that point, I'd need to check on that. I don't think at that point in time there were restrictions on visitors. I don't think so.
Okay. All right, last chance for Malaysia. Otherwise, we'll move on to Thailand. Thailand obviously had a really good track record, I guess you'd say, with COVID until the recent outbreak.
Yeah,
it's not by most country standards, not a huge outbreak in Thailand right now, but I guess compared to the track record they'd put together. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see things unfolding in Thailand in the months ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so Thailand, I mean, it's very interesting, obviously, to be here this week, albeit not yet out of the hotel room. As you say, Mark, Thailand had a really good run last year. It was coping with things very well. We ran, as other organizers did, we ran a couple of shows at the back end of last year. We ran ITM and ASE and ProPac in September, October time. Smaller shows than they normally would be, but they were decent shows. We had very high hopes for the first half of this year. But unfortunately, as you've said, there was a sort of surge of cases in recent weeks, which I think started around some entertainment venues. That led to more testing, more cases, etc. And unfortunately, things have spread. The numbers have been pretty consistent the last few days, around 2,000 cases, and a lot of those are in Bangkok. The numbers are slightly lower today, so we are hoping that the restrictions that have been put in place, which are there for the next 2 weeks, which include closing of MICE venues, restaurants shutting at 9 o'clock, sports and entertainment venues either closing or restricted hours, masks everywhere, you know, including outside, etc. So we're really hoping that these measures have the desired effect as quickly as possible. I mean, obviously the coming weeks are a real concern. I mean, I was originally here to visit Intermac, our machinery show, which was the 12th to 15th of May. We've unfortunately had to push that one back because we don't yet know the impact of these restrictions. We're obviously also getting a lot of concerns from customers, and we felt that we could put it back. It was the right thing to do. But yeah, so Thailand was looking super strong. We've got some problems in the short term, but I think medium to long term, we are very confident about this market, and in our ASEAN business, Thailand will play a very important role.
I don't know if you can, but if you could, the events that you organized last year in Thailand, can you give a sense for how much smaller they were versus 2019 or 2018? I mean,
I can't remember the exact figures, but they were a fair way down. I mean, we're not talking 10% down, but they were obviously, you know, they were still viable to run as shows. Obviously, I mean, by that point, you know, the restrictions, etc., were less. You know, ProPac we ran as the first of our hybrid events in ASEAN, etc. So they were a fair bit down, but they were still very strong events. You know, good visitorship given the challenges. So we were pretty happy with them, but I can't recall the exact number, I'm afraid.
No worries. And what about government support, TSEB, and the Thai government generally? Have they been providing support for organizers and for events?
Yeah, there's been a lot, really. I would say that you know, if you think about, I guess TSEB plays a very important role between the industry and between government departments, etc. I think they've done quite a lot in that period in terms of providing additional campaigns to support organizers, so on-site management around hygiene support, etc., some of the safety management measures. They've also, I think, been working with the organizers to provide pre-show marketing support for newly launched events, so really trying to drive new business, which is fantastic. I mean, I think all of us would understand the challenges of running underlying events at the moment, let alone launching new events. Any help we can have to launch new stuff, as we did in Malaysia, it's super helpful for the team. It's obviously helpful for the numbers. So they've been really, really good in that as well. And also with certain support for specific shows in certain regions of the country as well. Obviously, there's been a lot in recent weeks about the sort of proposed reopening of Thailand as a country in terms of tourism, and that was very much a phased approach. You know, a staged reopening with Phuket was originally planned to sort of open first, and that would be done with vaccinated travellers plus 7-day quarantine. That would then relax as you go through the months. That we're not quite sure whether there's going to be any impact on that at the moment. It doesn't look that will be the case. But
I read something that they're still planning to go ahead with the July 1st. I think that was sort of the tourist reopening for vaccinated travelers, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then what about the reopening program? I think it's supported by TSAB January 2022, sort of a reopening roadmap.
So as part of that timeline, the commitment as part of that was that it would be a full kind of border reopening by January 22, and then obviously with the various phases leading up to that. And you know, so clearly that would have meant, I guess, for organisers, you know, we were confident in our ability to run largely domestic events early this year, but you know, hopefully being able to include more internationals as we go through the year, with then a view to a full reopening in January 22 of borders, of shows, etc., near normality, and hopefully that will still be the case.
All right, thanks for that, Chris. Doesn't look like we have any questions about Thailand, so why don't we move on to Vietnam? Obviously a much smaller market, but also a country that had a lot of success with it early days, with a little bump along the way in Da Nang, which impacted some of your shows, I think. Is that right?
It did, yeah. It impacted a few of our shows, and I think that's very symptomatic of what happens in, I mean, Vietnam has handled it and managed it very, very well right from the outset. And as you mentioned, we were very confident of running a number of shows at the back end of last year. The Da Nang kind of outbreak or situation happened, and then that really put us back by a number of months. And I think that's one of the challenges we're all facing, is that you can be really safe and you can, move things along, and then when there's a problem, it really sets us back a few months. So that was difficult because it impacted our plans in Vietnam for the second half of the year. But overall, Vietnam is looking in pretty good shape. It has been managed very tightly. There's the internal flight program in Vietnam is very busy. Obviously, they're looking out for travel bubbles, etc., in the same way that everyone else is. I think 3 shows, not ours, but we have some soon, I would hope. 3 shows have taken place in recent weeks. There's been Viet Shrimp, I think the Vietnam Expo and Viet Build have all taken place, I think, in different formats, I think sometimes in different venues. Again, smaller shows than they would normally be. It's a step in the right direction. It gives us confidence that as long as things continue in the same way, that our program, which is really very busy, we hope in Q3 and 4, will be okay. So we're being careful on it because we don't want to be complacent. We've seen problems before, but we are confident that by that time of the year, Vietnam should be in a good place.
You said smaller shows and in different venues. The venues are pretty small in Vietnam to begin with.
They are, yeah. They are.
Hotels, or what other venues did they go to?
I think one of them, there was a sports venue, an entertainment venue of some kind, but I can't recall the detail. But obviously the traditional venues have also been used, but the formats are a bit different. They're smaller, but I think in terms of visitor flow, the shows are looking pretty strong.
And domestic travel in Vietnam is basically unrestricted right now?
I'm not sure it's fully unrestricted, but it's certainly pretty heavy, yeah.
All Okay, let's move on to the Philippines, which has obviously had a massive spike in recent weeks, and I would assume the outlook is not particularly good for 2021 there.
We're still hoping, but yeah, it doesn't look too great at the moment. I mean, Philippines has had a slightly, a tough time overall. The cases have been pretty high consistently, but there's certainly been a sort of spike in cases since kind of February, March time, but it's definitely now heading in the right direction. So the cases were around 10,000 a day. They now dropped to about 7,000 a day. This again, it's a different kind of acronym, but the Philippines is in a modified enhanced community quarantine until the 14th of May, and then we'll see what happens after then. In that period, there's no shows. Hopefully, we can at that point move to a GCQ level, which will then then allow shows to start taking place. And we know that although there's still clearly some challenges, we are hopeful ourselves of a couple of events towards the back end of the year. We're hopeful for ProPac and also for Water Show. And I think if you look at some of the venue bookings around the country, we've got shows that are still booked in earlier than that. So I think realistically, like most of the countries in ASEAN and further afield, it's very unlikely that we can have any international participants at those shows. We'll have to bring those in through hybrid means, etc. But we are hopeful that in terms of domestic, one, we're hopeful that we can run shows, and we're hopeful that as a largely domestic audience, that we can make those work later in the year. So yeah, not without challenges, but we've still got some hope and some confidence in the Philippines.
Were you able to manage, or were you able to hold any events in the Philippines in 2020?
The first event of the year was ProPac Philippines, which I think my colleague Dexter is on the call. I think it was the first week of February. I think from memory, it might have been the last week of January. And it was right at the start. It was impacted to a degree in the fact that we had to run, we obviously had to, it was the start of the safe management measures. Visitors were a little bit light, etc. But it was a really strong show, and it was the first of the shows of last year. Yeah.
And then after that, you haven't had any events in the Philippines since then, right?
No.
Okay.
No. Again, a lot of digital activity for the brands that we've got there and the vertical brands, but nothing since.
And I see Vicky Tan has posted there's Water Philippines and Phil Energy on December 8 to 10, 21, which will be hybrid, I guess, to include the
correct. And then we've got ProPac and Livestock in a similar time frame.
Okay. Moving on, Myanmar. After the coup in early February, I guess there's a big question mark over when you'll be holding events there.
Yeah, there is, and it's obviously a tough situation. I mean, for us in ASEAN, Myanmar has been we've been in the market for I think 6 or 7 years. I think is about right. It's a small, relatively small business for us, but it's also very important, and we've really seen how important that could be in the future, and we've really maintained a business there. I think obviously it's been difficult in COVID, really. We were planning, or we were hoping to run a kind of combined food and packaging show in Myanmar this year. We were originally aiming for late summer, then we wanted to push it back. Unfortunately, everything that's happened since February with the coup, it's just made that impossible now. And obviously everyone can see the situation on the news. It's very difficult. So we remain as committed as we've ever been in the long term, but we're not sure of what that timeline looks like and when we get back in. And we don't expect that will be this year.
Yeah, seems likely. Okay. Indonesia. Obviously a really important market in ASEAN. There's still, I think there's several thousand cases a day right now in Indonesia coming in. What's the status of events there?
Yeah, so Indonesia has had similar stats to Philippines at certain times. It's certainly had that cases are still quite high, but this had periods where it's been a lot higher. So we're certainly heading in the right direction. And as a market, the events market, even with those problems, we can really see things starting to move, which is great. So there was a trial event, an Indonesian motor show event, which I think took place second half of April, I think over about 10 days. Quite a large event, so very promising. Obviously, motor shows tend to be very large stands, so not a huge number of exhibitors, but a large show. Pretty strong protocol, I think, across the board. So PCR testing, obviously very good hygiene measures, etc. And we're not seen too much more yet. It wasn't one of our shows. Not seen too much more yet on the results or the visitor numbers, etc. But it was certainly very high profile because hopefully it's the first of a number of shows. It is sort of being positioned as a trial event, so sort of working in conjunction with a task force there, etc., with the Exhibition Organisers Association. But that is certainly a step in the right direction for Indonesia. Our view, we've done a lot digitally, but we are hopeful that some of our major events within the Pamarindo business will be able to run by the back end of this year. So we've still got some problems to overcome, of course, as we all have, but we are confident that we should be able to run a couple by the end of this year.
Back to the motor show for a moment. Was that I know it wasn't your show, but was it a B2C show? Because they tend to have huge numbers in terms of visitors.
Yeah, and my understanding is yes. I think that's the case. I don't know the visitor numbers yet, and my understanding, I don't think anything has yet been released on that. I know that in terms of square meters, what I hear is that it was a pretty big show, but as I say, obviously normally driven by very large stand sizes as well. But it certainly sounds like a step in the right direction.
Yeah, indeed. And they were requiring PCR test on site for participants.
Yeah, there was certainly PCR testing, but going back to the point, I don't know the exact of when that took place before the show, how the show, etc. But yeah, there was some PCR testing as part of the SOPs.
And what about government support for the industry in Indonesia?
Yeah, that's also been good, and I think that's part of things heading in the right direction. So again, there's been a lot of collaboration, I think, between the government, between the industry. I think there's a lot of focus on SOPs within trial events. They're developing a single communication track between the respective ministries and also with the event industry itself. So I think that should help things like the application and approval of event licenses. So rather than everyone going through their own channels, it should align things and hopefully speed things up a little bit more. We also hear, I don't think this is confirmed yet in terms of dates, but through the Exhibition Organisers Association, we hear that they are trying to get complete vaccinations for all frontline exhibition industry staff within the next 2 or 3 weeks, which is, I think, a really positive sign for the industry. Obviously, it's still other measures that need to be taken, but I think if we can get our staff and our teams on site and safe, that's a very big step.
So the government is considering this as an initiative to vaccinate the entire exhibition industry, essentially. As
I say, we haven't had approval yet or confirmation on dates, but that's certainly the intention or what we hear at the moment, yes.
That's the first I've heard of an initiative like that. That's pretty impressive. All right, everyone, last chance for some questions before we wrap up. I'll ask Chris a couple general ones just about the region, and then if anyone has anyone, just put them in the chat there. So Chris, maybe if we can finish on somewhat of a, I mean, it's been pretty positive actually overall, even just what you said about Indonesia, given the caseload there, it's surprisingly upbeat, I would say. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about your outlook for ASEAN for the rest of the year and for 2022.
Yeah, of course. So, I think it's fair, 2021, we obviously look as being a transitional year, you know, still obviously facing challenges, a better year than 2020, but you know, a transitional year. And then we expect to get back to, you know, a year of growth in 2022. Now, it's difficult to say with any degree of certainty what that will look like, because we're just not there yet at the moment. There's still too many moving parts. We're still not sure which events might move from 22 to 23, etc. And obviously, I guess, you know, every country in ASEAN is also very different. So you'll see some of the countries are facing more challenges than others, but we certainly see 22 as being a year that is starting again to move into the right direction, and a return to much more significant growth than we've seen in 21. It's difficult to say with any certainty sort of below that, but that's certainly the expectations, and I think that's really in line with our business. Overall, I would say that, you know, we continue to face real tests. I mean, you know, only 3 or 4 weeks ago, Bangkok looked absolutely fine. And, you know, the fact that we're here now and we've had to move into MAC is really difficult. So I think that just shows the challenges that the industry is facing. So that's not going to change overnight, but we do have hope and confidence in each of these markets. And we've put a plan in place that we believe gives us enough flexibility, but is as close as we can get it to being accurate. In terms of the sort of long-term dynamic here, obviously the times are tough at the moment, but we all believe, and I think it's not just my colleagues, but also industry colleagues, but we believe that the future is very, very bright for the ASEAN region. I mean, if you look at the sort of size of the population as a unit compared to other geographical areas, you know, the strong demographics, the likely investment in infrastructure, et cetera, you know, and the various trade agreements, et cetera, we believe that, like everywhere else, there's still some tough times ahead, but we think the future is super bright for this region.
And what would you say, what are the key growth drivers or key themes that you see driving growth in ASEAN?
I mean, I think there's, you know, I think the manufacturing base here, I think, is very strong, but I think there'll be very, very continued growth in other sectors like technology. You know, if you look across a lot of the ASEAN countries, I think, you know, you've got, I think the sort of growth of the region as a whole, I think obviously you've got a very well-educated workforce, you know, a lot of natural resources. There's a very big, has been for a long time, a big kind of rapid urbanization push. As I say, I think there will be an increased focus on infrastructure spending, I believe. So I think the overall dynamic for the region, I feel, is very, very strong. And I think that's going to lead to a very healthy and robust and growing event sector in this region. We've just got to get over the immediate hurdles of being allowed to do that, of the borders, etc., of the safety management measures, get the balance right so that we can do it sustainably. And then I think the future will be very bright here in that sort of medium to long-term perspective.
We've got one question here from Tommy Park. He's asking about the chance of international shows in late 2021. I was asking him if he was interested in a particular market. So in general, in ASEAN, which markets are you most optimistic about having at least some international participation?
It's a very good question, and I don't think any of them are, any of the ASEAN markets are going to be open, you know, fully open. We've talked about Thailand's plan for January 22 in terms of open borders. But I do believe that as vaccinations and testing gets better and better and better, and we can see the impact this is having in other parts of the world, that the sort of the constraints on international travel will obviously get less. And I think you look at countries like Singapore, which is trying to adopt this this testing over quarantine model. You know, we heard earlier about the number of people coming in for some of the shows. That will only increase, we hope, in time as as I say, the vaccination programs move up, the testing gets better, etc. So I don't think we're going to be back to full capacity international shows by the end of 21 by any means, but I really hope that through those type of measures we can have a few internationals coming in, and also obviously from our business perspective, it's where the importance of hybrid events is so high, because we want to engage that audience through that channel while they can't come in live.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I see the same thing unfolding. I mean, just when I hear the Hong Kong government, what they're focused on, similar to Singapore, trying to get some bubbles, some protocols in place so we can get some international travel in the second half. And
yeah,
it'll be hopeful if Thailand can still press ahead with their plan to go with July 1st. That I think that's a pretty hopeful sign.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Chris, thanks so much. Thanks for the tour of the region. I really appreciate that. Well done.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining today. Please register for the UFI Asia Pacific conference on May 20th. You can register at ufiasia.org. We've got upcoming events. So we've got UFI Asia Pacific on May 20th. We've got the Middle East Africa on the 26th of May. And Nick, who's on the call there, has his European conference on June 9th and 10th. You can register on the UFI website. All the information is there. All of the program information is there. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll see you on May 20th.